This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
Being able to research, being able to find and synthesize information, all of that is really transferable.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, as part of the Career Curious series, I'm talking with Erin Craine, Grants and Contracts Coordinator, Research Administration at the University of Arizona. Hello, Erin. Thanks for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Hi, Jen. Thanks. It's great to be here.
I really want to ask you how you got started, but first, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to explain what your job is right now at the University of Arizona. I'm curious what a grants and contracts coordinator does exactly.
Sure. It's kind of a nondescript title if you're not aware of the background. But basically, I'm part of the research administration team for the university's College of Agriculture, Life Science, Life and Vet Science, and Cooperative Extension. So that's quite a mouthful. But what the research administration team does essentially is we assist the college's faculty members and research scientists in putting together proposal packages. These proposals can go to various sponsors, but essentially the faculty members looking to obtain research funding that supports their research and their projects. And since I'm with the College of Ag, our biggest funders are actually federal sponsors. So we work a lot with the National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But faculty members can apply to any sort of funding institution. So we have foundation grants, state grants, and funding from other various entities. And the idea behind having a research administration team is to basically take the administrative burden of applying for funding off of the faculty so they can instead focus on the science and the methodology and the more technical aspects of putting together their proposal. What we do is we look at sort of the formatting requirements and the technical requirements that these sponsors are looking for when proposals are submitted. So the faculty member puts together the technical content, we review it to make sure it's adhering to all the standards and formats that that sponsor requires.
So that sounds like very technical, procedural work, right?
It's a lot of editing, yeah, and a lot of the content that we can look at, we're not science experts, we're not judging it on the merits of that, but more, does this make sense? Is it meeting all the checkpoints that the sponsor is looking for as far as formatting and making sure all the documents needed for the proposal are contained in the package.
And then once they receive their funding, do you also help on the other end where they have to report back to the funders?
So that's split. I'm working on the pre-proposal team. So essentially making sure it's routed correctly internally according to university policies and then submitted to the federal sponsor. Should the grant get funded, there's a post-proposal team that does make sure that all reporting and terms and conditions and financial requirements are being followed and met. So it's sort of broken into depending where in the grant cycle the proposal is.
Oh my goodness. So that's a lot of people. I guess that sort of negates what I was thinking. I wondered why wouldn't it be within the fundraising department to help support them get their funding? But I guess federal grants are really this animal beside.
Yeah, and I think the difference is, with foundation funding or individual giving, there aren't necessarily as many requirements that need to be met. But when you're, working with a federal sponsor, either through a grant or a contract, the terms are much more stringent, right? So it's kind of a different set of parameters you're working within. So it's funding, but there are some certain rules and requirements that you have to follow and that, the university has a vested interest in making sure they're not in violation of.
So you're using all the same kind of skill sets that we do in prospect research in the sense that you're highly detailed, you're into process and procedure. That's kind of fun, but you're part of a team.
Yeah, it is. So I came from sort of a larger prospect research shop. So I was kind of used to having colleagues that, you could bounce ideas off of and use their expertise. So that was similar here. And there is kind of a lot of overlap within the University Research Administration. So not every college has their own research admin team, probably primarily because a lot of colleges aren't really as heavily focused on research funding and research projects. So there is actually a university-wide proposal team that will look at any proposal coming in from any unit. And that's the sponsored projects team. So they're kind of looking at it from a higher level, broader university-wide level rather than at the college level. But yeah, definitely all the skills that I used as a prospect researcher are very relevant to what I'm doing here. It's not as much searching for funding because faculty members tend to know what grants fit their research. They have a better handle on that. But it's definitely, the detail-oriented, working on a timeline, working with deadlines, and sort of pulling information from various sources into one kind of cohesive document.
So how long did you do prospect research? Was that at the University of Arizona as well?
That was at the U of A Foundation as well. I did it for a little over 2 years. So not a terribly long time, but I did sort of fall into it, I think, like most people did. It wasn't, a career goal of mine to be a prospect researcher.
So I guess when you were earning your degree, you have an undergraduate and a graduate degree at the University of Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
What were you imagining you would do with those degrees?
I think like most, people in their early 20s, I really didn't have much of an idea of what a career would actually look like potentially. I certainly wasn't aware of any sort of work in the development space. I had worked at a nonprofit, but it wasn't in the fundraising side of things. I think I had kind of a vague notion of, maybe go to law school or go for another master's degree. But I worked as a research assistant right after graduating, and I was kind of like, this is kind of in alignment with a lot of what librarians do. And I thought that was probably a good path forward in gaining a lot of sort of applicable skills that could be applied to actually really any job. It's a useful skills to have, being able to research, being able to find and synthesize information. All of that is really transferable.
So that research assistant job right after you graduated, was that prospect research?
Mm-hmm. No, it wasn't. So I worked at an environmental nonprofit, and their mission was basically educating people about the adverse effects of light pollution. It's a very specific mission, but I did a lot of research into legislation and local ordinances to see what kind of regulations cities or communities had regarding lights and lighting requirements for their communities.
Oh my goodness. So you have been into information and data from the very start in very different ways.
Yes, and very much without planning it. It just kind of sort of unfolded that way, which was a surprise to me as well.
So what happened? You were doing prospect research. You were part of a team. What was that like? And how did you end up leaving?
I was a librarian for a number of years before going into prospect research. And the focus on that sort of training is, access to information, basically. And it kind of, I'm like many librarians, I'm a bit of an introvert. And so it kind of sounds like the dream job, right? You're surrounded by books, you're looking up information, but it kind of is essentially, when you boil it down, a customer service job. So for example, at the U of A, I mostly worked the reference desk, and I, was standing behind a desk in front of a computer in a large room with just a stream of people kind of approaching me all day constantly. And I liked that, and I liked helping the students, but it was kind of exhausting. So I felt like prospect research was a good use of those researching skills and that skill set without necessarily having to kind of be on all the time. My first day at the office, I had my own office with a door you could close if you needed to concentrate. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So that was sort of the transition into prospect research. The transition out of it was not as intentional. I saw this position opening here on campus And what I think mostly was my incentive for applying was just kind of, I was curious about it. Like you, I wasn't entirely sure what that title means. What does that actually entail? And so I just kind of wanted to hear more about it. And again, it just seemed like another venue for developing research skills with a different focus. So being able to expand on that skill set is kind of what each job has brought to my career. And I find that sort of satisfying to, learn a little bit more about different ways of applying your certain research skills.
Well, that's neat. And when you're in this position now, how does that work out in terms of interactions with others versus quiet time?
I would say it's sort of in between the customer service element of the library and the more solo research of prospect research. So it is sort of working more directly with faculty. It's a lot of back and forth about editing and saying, oh, is this okay? Are you okay with this change? Oh, there's a deadline coming up. We need to make sure we're, getting our documents together. So it's sort of in the middle, which is kind of a nice balance that you're not, locked away in a room, but you're also not, having to be in the midst of a crowd all the time either. So that was actually a pleasant surprise. I think the balance here is pretty good as far as that goes.
It's funny because as much as I love to research and I love getting lost in the research, not being aware of the time, but when I have a project that consumes me all day and I don't have interactions with others, it is depressing to me. Like I need a little bit.
It is, and it's so easy to, stay that way. You kind of have to like force yourself out of it a little to kind of break that concentration and be like, oh, I haven't seen a person all day. I should probably go see what's going on in the outside world.
Yeah, for me, it's sort of like, oh, you really should make those client calls. Even if you have this project, just make one.
Yeah, like you mean email isn't the only method of communication. You have to call.
Yes, they love it when I call.
I know.
So if someone is in prospect research, it's funny, you came from the library sciences, prospect research. Some people are in prospect research and go out to the library sciences. But if someone's thinking, should I stay in prospect research? What are the other choices out there in the world? What kind of advice would you give them about how to make those decisions?
I mean, that's kind of tough. It's a really personal, individual question. I know when I left the libraries, a lot of my colleagues and friends I still have who are librarians, like, oh, this is a big deal. You're actually leaving the profession. You're not a librarian anymore. And, I didn't do it as some big, revolutionary step. It just sort of happened. And I think that's kind of the way a lot of career mobility works. I mean, if you're happy with your position as a prospect researcher, then, stay in that position. Or if you're happy with the role and you leave it, you can always find another role that you're happy with. You don't want to get sucked into this mentality that there's only going to be one job ever in your entire career that you like. I think the only thing I'd say is what not to base your decision to stay or go on. And that's change, because I know it's easy to get nervous or anxious or angry when management is like, oh, we're going to start making drastic changes to how we're currently operating. So for example, when I left the libraries, they were switching over to a different database system. And I didn't leave the job because of that. But I remember thinking at the time, like, oh, good, I won't have to deal with all that upheaval. That'll be nice. And then I started at the foundation and I started, working in Razor's Edge. And just as I was getting comfortable with that, I was promptly signed up to do design testing for the new database that they were converting to. So if, that's your reason for staying or going, that's probably going to be a constant wherever you are, is this notion of change and, not being the same way forever.
I couldn't agree more. The pace of change with technology has sped up. Like it will change during your tenure, regardless of how long or how short.
Yeah, there's no way you're going to be doing something at the beginning that's the exact same way at the end of your time in a company.
Before I let you go, I'm wondering if you have a favorite resource that you want to share and maybe with someone who's trying to decide what to be when she grows up?
As someone who had that same problem and sort of stumbled into a lot of things, yeah, actually I do. I think a great resource is actually the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. They put out an occupational outlook handbook. And I think from their perspective, it's looking more at like the financial and economic ramifications of certain jobs. But basically, it's kind of lists an insane number of careers, and it groups them sort of by family type. So, like business and financial, teaching, marketing, whatever. And it's just a great way to explore and compare, different positions. And they give information about training, about what a typical work environment is like, what pay is like. And so you can kind of decide what's important to you in a job and see which one matches, your ideal work environment.
That is a great resource. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jen. It was great chatting with you.
That was Erin Craine, Grants and Contracts Coordinator, Research Administration at the University of Arizona. Were you surprised how different her work is from the corporate and foundation relations or grant writing in the world of philanthropic fundraising? We live in this world now where chances are all of us are going to experience multiple careers. Hopefully, you got some ideas from Erin's experience on how you can use your strengths, interests, and existing skills to bridge to new careers. Hey, if you enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come check out the Prospect Research Institute's learning community. It's a membership community with powerful resources, great discussions, and comprehensive courses. Check it out at member.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I'd love to have you join me as a member of the learning community. See you there.